Have you ever felt a strange presence you can't explain? Have you noticed your pet staring into the darkness at something you can't see?
Welcome to Spirit Hounds, the podcast that combines our two passions, the paranormal and all things canine.
I'm Nicky, Gardiner, an author with a keen interest in the paranormal.
I'm Davina, a professional dog trainer and instructor.
And we are joined by our curious miniature dachshund, Rosie.
Join us as we explore the fascinating world of ghostly encounters, spooky legends from around the globe, as well as real-life dog training tips and techniques. Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of Spirit Hounds. Before we get started in what today's episode will be about and what's on the agenda, I just wanted to put something out there before Christmas time. This time of year, people are going to be buying pets for Christmas. I would implore everybody not to buy a dog for Christmas as a gift unless you have really done all your research about it. Typically, in the UK, about 30% of dogs are abandoned after the first 3 months of the year following Christmas. This is for a range of reasons. It's 3 months after they're just beginning to understand the true cost of the responsibility of having a dog.
Also, it's worth asking the intended person who's going to get the gift to make sure they actually want a dog and find out what kind of dog they want, because if you're gifting it to someone else, you really don't have an idea of what they want from their pet.
Exactly. The responsibilities of having a dog are very high. For a small size dog, you're looking at £5,000 to £10,000 over its lifetime. For a medium-sized dog, £7,500 to £11,800. For a large dog, £7,500 to £15,900 over its lifetime. So it's a big financial responsibility, as well as the emotional ties as well. And you have to make sure that you know the breed and its characteristics and that you can meet all of its needs.
We've encountered quite a few people over the last 8 years that Davina's been doing the dog training who haven't done their research. They've either got some kind of mobility issue and they get a working dog, for example, or there's other sort of things like that they've not considered.
Exactly. I mean, if you think about it, the initial startup when you get a dog is quite an outlay. I mean, you're looking at about £400 when you first get a dog. You've got to buy its bed, its collar and lead. You've got to think about food and water bowls, the brush for grooming, toys, restraints for the car, their initial vaccinations, neutering costs. That's just the initial startup costs. Then as time goes on, each month you've got to think about things such as the insurance costs, their food, booster vaccinations, flea and worm treatments. It's an ongoing responsibility that you have to take into account before you get any type of dog. So again, I would implore you to think very carefully before getting a dog for Christmas or buying a dog as a gift for someone for Christmas. And just to reiterate the slogan from the Dogs Trust, a dog is for life, not just for Christmas.
And I would point out that we got Rosie between Christmas and New Year, and it wasn't planned, but due to her medical reasons, she's cost us a lot more than what you're outlining.
Exactly, yes. When we got Rosie, we had to make sure we had the correct insurance in place for her needs. Being a dachshund, they do have problems with their back. We will talk about this in more length in future episodes, but they are quite commonly prone to getting a disease called IVDD. So the insurance costs to cover an instance of that were quite high. And this year alone, because of her spinal surgery, it's cost about £9,000. So thank goodness for insurance, but you do have the monthly cost of the premiums to think about.
Welcome to episode 2 of Spirit Hounds. On today's agenda, we're going to cover the Villisca Axe Murder house. We're going to go over a book that I brought out in 2015. And then we're going to cover barking with dogs and how to stop it. On the night of June the 9th, 1912, Josiah Moore and his wife, 3 sons and daughter attended an evening church service before returning home, accompanied by 2 friends of his daughters who were invited to spend the night at the home. Around 7 a.m. the following morning, a neighbour noticed the house was unusually quiet, and when she found the doors locked and all the windows covered, she called Moore's brother, who unlocked the house and found his relatives bloodied and lifeless in their beds. The Villisca Axe Murder house in Villisca, Iowa, is a well-known tourist attraction for ghost hunters and horror lovers alike. The site of a gruesome unsolved murder in which 6 children and 2 adults were slaughtered by the axe of an unknown perpetrator. Cigarette butts in the attic led investigators to believe that the killer snuck into the attic while the family was out and hid there until they fell asleep. The parents, Josiah and Sarah Moore, were the first victims. The killer only used the blade of the weapon on Josiah, who received the most brutal beating. The rest of the victims were murdered with the blunt side of the axe, which had belonged to Josiah. The axe was left in the guest room next to a 4-pound piece of bacon. At some point, the killer had covered all of the mirrors in the house with blankets and clothes and cooked himself a plate of food, which was then left untouched in the kitchen. He also left behind a bowl of bloody water. Local officials quickly lost control of the crime scene, where an estimated 100 people arrived to gawk at the mutilated bodies. Fingerprints had yet to become a widely established tool of criminal investigation in the US, and the massive disturbance to the house from onlookers prevented detectives from collecting sufficient evidence for a conclusive investigation. Gouge marks across bedroom ceilings from the upswing of the axe revealed something about the killer's height, exonerating one particular short suspect, but these marks were in the centre of the room, not above the victim's bed, and they were thought to be the killer whirlwinding the axe in a one-handed frenzy of excitement. The bodies of Lena and Ina Stillinger were discovered in the downstairs bedroom at the base of 12-year-old Lena's bed. A kerosene lamp was found, possibly used to project light onto her body, which was lying in a sexually pose with her underwear missing, blood smeared across her legs and defensive wounds across her arms. Investigators believe she was the victim of sexual abuse, and also the only member of the house who attempted to fight off her attacker. Sam Moyer was arrested for the murder. He was the brother-in-law of Moore, and he had been quarrelling with him as well as his sister, and had been heard to threaten to get even with them. However, Moyer's alibi cleared him of the crime. There were plenty of suspects, but the murder was never solved. One other suspect, Reverend George Kelly, was actually tried for the murders. Many researchers have done deep dives on Kelly. While intelligent and articulate, he suffered from mental issues and was diagnosed with schizophrenia. He had a penchant for peeping in windows and was known as a firebug, and confessed to a series of arson crimes. But investigators failed to arrest him initially for a simple reason: his slight build. At only 5 foot 2 inches and about 119 pounds, 8.5 stone, the coroner and detectives for hire believed he was physically incapable of the crimes. By the time he was arrested, 5 years had passed since the murders. Witnesses had difficulty remembering details that, combined with a coerced confession and a lack of physical evidence, left one jury hung and a second ended in a mistrial. Kelly eventually left the Midwest and settled in New England. His behaviour became increasingly erratic. In one stint he worked as a chaplain for New Jersey chapter of the KKK. His last job seemed fairly responsible, working as a chaplain for the larger Bowery Street Mission in New York. Kelly died in 1959 at the age of 80 in Islip Hospital in upstate New York, one of the country's largest and most notorious psychiatric hospitals of the time. He and his wife are buried in Woodland Cemetery in the Bronx. The house was purchased in 1994, restored to its 1912 condition and converted into a tourist destination, while visitors always report strange paranormal experiences, such as visions of a man with an axe roaming the halls or the faint screams of children. A number of books and documentaries have chronicled the murders and subsequent paranormal investigations of the Moore house. They cite various individuals who claim to have seen a man with an axe roaming the hallways, or heard the desperate cries of children in their bedrooms, or become trapped inside the bedroom closet where Lena Stillinger is thought to have hid from her attacker. But when Rundle began filming his documentary Villisca Living with a Mystery in the 1990s, there had been little talk of the house being haunted. He says that in his years of filming inside the house, he never experienced or saw anything out of the ordinary, nor did any of the previous occupants he spoke with, who had lived in the house for years before it became a tourist attraction. The first paranormal investigators visited the house in 1999. They declared the house was haunted and that they would identify who the killer was. In November of 2014, the haunting took a darker turn. Robert Stephen Lawson Jr., 37, of Rhinelander, Wisconsin, was on a regular recreational paranormal visit with friends when true horror struck. His companions found him stabbed in the chest, an apparently self-inflicted wound, called 911, and Lawson was brought to a nearby hospital before being helicoptered to Crichton University Medical Center in Omaha. The Montgomery County Sheriff Office said Lawson suffered the self-inflicted injury at about 12:45 a.m, which is around the same time the 1912 axe murders in the house began. Lawson recovered from his injuries, but has never spoken publicly about what occurred that day. For Martha Lynn, the owner of the home at the time, the incident was very upsetting. I don't want people thinking that when they come to the Villisca Axe Murder house, something's going to happen that's going to make them do something like that. The house remains open for tourist visits and overnight stays today. Now, we have seen at least 3 different ghost investigation teams explore this location. What do you think? Do you believe it's haunted? And if so, why?
It's a fascinating story. It's a very tragic story. The events that happened in that house on that night, was it 8 people murdered in one night? It's awful. And the murderer never brought to justice. still a bit up in the air as to who actually did it. It's a bit like the American version of our Jack the Ripper, I suppose, where true identity is never really known. I think we know, really, from what you were saying. It sounds like the preacher man was actually the one behind it, especially going by his future track record after the events.
Okay, but do you believe it's haunted?
It's very strange that it took nearly 100 years after the events before people started experiencing events happening within the property.
Yeah, but is that because, like all ghost stories, once one person says they see something, you get more people saying, oh yeah, I saw it too, and this sort of mass hysteria around it starts, or the fun of telling a ghost story around it starts?
Yeah, probably. There's also that thought or the belief around the manifestation of something. If enough people say they've seen a certain thing, that then starts manifesting itself to other people. It's interesting. And a lot of the programs we've seen about this particular case, they do seem to jump at the merest noise or bang or anything in the distance. There's jumping on it saying it's proof of this, proof of that.
During my research online, I did find that one of the guides had been interviewed by someone, and she said that most people in the town don't believe it's haunted, and that
Really?
when they know overnight stays are actually happening within the property, children will actually go up and bang on the windows for a laugh and things like that. So it could be as well that they are helping sort of self-perpetuate it.
Really?
Yeah.
That's interesting. I suppose it's always tricky when you're in a place that's quite notorious and people live around that place, because unless it's in the middle of nowhere, how are you going to eradicate noises outside or people being naughty and trying to mess up an investigation?
But I will say that the guide also said that when she's been in the property, she has heard footsteps on another floor. So if she's upstairs, she is downstairs, and vice versa, when no one else is in the house.
It's an old property though, isn't it?
That's very old, yeah.
Are the foundations the same? Because I do remember seeing on one of the last programmes someone moving up and down on the spot, and the floor was a bit echoey and noisy where the floorboards were.
It's an old wooden house, isn't it? So do we think that all these hauntings started so much later? Do we believe that is just because it became more sort of public awareness at the time? It was one person said it and then it started.
That makes more sense, because it's such a long time after the event. Someone's bought it, I think read the history about it, and has tried to possibly perpetuate something, start a story up, and it's just taken hold and run at its own speed.
Okay. And we think that, like, the documentary filmer, he saw nothing, and he said he was in there for a couple of years filming.
That's very telling. I know a lot of investigators say if they're just overnight in a place, they're not going to get very much activity happening, whereas if you're there for a longer period of time, if there are entities around, they're going to become more comfortable around you and maybe start making the noises that they would normally make, whatever that might be, rattling chains or banging walls or footsteps or whatnot, maybe building up the energy of the person that's staying there. But if someone stayed there for 2 years and they haven't picked up anything...
I don't think he stayed there overnight necessarily, so it may have been just in the day. I haven't seen the documentary myself.
Okay, but if he's been in there filming, recording things for, I'd imagine, quite a lot of time over that 2-year period, and he hasn't picked up anything, that's quite telling. It's like the Amityville house. I don't think anything happened after the Lutzes left. I think the house has been in several people's ownership since then, and I don't think much has happened since then. No one has recorded or reported incidents in that much detail since the Lutzes lived there after what happened. It was the DeFeo murder story, I think, at the Amityville house, but maybe we could talk about that in another episode.
Okay. And how do you feel about the murder scene becoming a haunted attraction? Because when I started researching this, and there was so much more about the murders than the actual haunting side of it, there's this little bit of you that thinks, oh, maybe I shouldn't be covering this, it feels wrong to be going in there and doing what people are doing. I can get the appeal. Like if I was in America and I live local, being interested in ghosts and paranormal stuff, part of me probably would want to give it a go. But equally, it feels really macabre thing to be doing.
I think if it's done in a respectful way and it's done with the consent of the owner of the property, then it's okay. I don't like it when investigators go in and they're laughing and whooping and screaming and swearing and things like that. It seems very disrespectful, especially if you do believe that you're maybe talking to the entity of a 10-year-old child. Why would you be effing and blinding?
I can't remember which show it was, but we did watch one and they actually took an axe in the house to be a trigger object, which again, if you believe in anything, seems really wrong. If you believe there's a load of children in there who were killed with an axe, to take an axe in just to try and get a response for you to get good footage or content for your streaming channel or whatever just seemed a little bit too extreme.
That does seem really unnecessary, doesn't it? One of the episodes we saw where the investigators were in the property, they thought they were talking to the ghost of the murderer. The murderer didn't die in the property. Why would they be thinking that they're talking to his ghost?
Exactly, and I think it was the same programme we watched, and they were saying about how there's a dark presence there and how that might have took over this person and made them do what they did. And chances are it's just some sick individual. I mean, if it is the preacher, it was just the fact that he was mentally ill, he's schizophrenia. I don't know, it feels like a cop-out saying, oh yeah, it was this black entity, this demon, or whatever you want to call it, that he's responsible for it. It kind of lets him off the hook.
Does let him off the hook a bit, especially as he's already got into the property and hidden in there. Then this dark presence has taken him over. So he's already gone into the house with intent, but then taken over by this bad presence. Doesn't make sense to me.
It's very premeditated, isn't it? The fact that he sat there smoking cigarettes before he did anything.
Yeah, and he left a lump of bacon in the room as well.
Random, that.
It's one thing to go on a murderous spree anyway, and I don't think you're particularly mentally stable if you do that in the first instance, but to leave a pack of bacon in the bedroom and then make a meal, then leave it untouched, leave everything around. There must have been some procedures in place to identify murder suspects at that time. I know it was 1911, did you say?
1912.
1912. Okay, so we had some form of forensics around at that point, because when we were watching Ripper Street, which was 1888, set at that time...
It's quite fictional, though.
It was quite fictional, but we did have some forensic techniques in place at the time, so it's not as if nothing was available. Just the fact that...
I don't think it was very widespread if it was, though.
Maybe not, but there would have been something in place where if they hadn't let loads of people trounce around the murder scene, they could have maybe, like you said, solved it a lot quicker.
The worrying thing is, they think it was one of many murders. I think it's just the one that got the most notoriety because of the amount of victims in one night.
Okay.
But there was a spree of killings in that area, and there were various names in various papers for the killer, from Billy the Axeman, Midwest Axeman, and the man from the train, because they believed that he used the train to get from place to place, killing people.
And if it was the preacher, who was a travelling preacher, wasn't he?
He was.
Going from state to state, preaching. And if these murders, again, if people look back at it now, maybe put a timeline on it, maybe they could place him in the same areas preaching at the time of other incidents happening, and maybe that would tie it all up.
There was just this spree of murders in the US Midwest between September 1911 and June 1912.
And then he just stopped.
Seems to be. I mean, all the attacks that were attributed to the killer are characterised by the slaying of the whole family in their beds by crushing their skulls with a blunt instrument, usually an axe. The families often lived in very close proximity to the railroad, which they assumed is his transportation, and they reckon possibly a signature characteristic included the destruction of the victim's face whilst being covered, and the staging of one of the female victims in a manner that indicated lust murder.
Wow, it just doesn't bear thinking about, does it? And am I right in thinking that when the murders took place, only one of the people that he killed, I think was it the mum, he used the sharp side of the axe, but the rest of it was the blunt?
It was the dad.
The dad, they used the sharp side of the axe. Why use an axe if you're... Sounds horrible, not trying to put ideas in people's heads, but why use an axe if you're not going to use the axe bit of it? Why not just use a lump of wood?
I don't know, the weight of it. It's to hand as well. Most households had an axe at that period.
So you're saying it was a premeditated crime, but he didn't take his own murder weapon?
No, he usually took the murder weapon from the house.
Did he use the same murder weapon all the time?
No, he didn't. No, it was usually from the same house, or would be from a neighbouring house if you link it to the other murders.
Unless he went in with his pack of bacon, intending to use that, and then found an axe.
Well, it's one powerful bit of bacon you've got there, isn't it? So there have been many different theories about this now. Most theories focus on a series of the crimes which range from that period, 1911 to 1912. There's been a number of authors who have written books on it. Bill James and Rachel McCarthy. James published A Man from the Train, in which he argued for a longer crime series spanning from 1898 to 1912. This revised theory attributes over 90 deaths to this man.
Really?
Yeah, which makes him one of the most prolific serial killers in the US history, if it is the same guy. But the modus operandi, or whatever you say it, that is all the same pretty much. There's very little variation. So you either got people doing the identical kind of crime at the time, which seems quite far-fetched to get a copycat, although it was in the papers. It did make the papers quite regular.
Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, you had papers, but we weren't in the day and age of instant news, were we, back then?
No.
So to have a copycat in various places doing things in a relatively short space of time seems quite a far-fetched theory.
But do we think it's haunted? That's the question. I mean, we've seen quite a few different shows now, and I think the most compelling evidence I've seen are when they do the audio recordings and they catch voices on there. Things like the Ovilus and other things where it's just chucking a random word. Again, you don't know down to editing how many words come up that didn't count, didn't hit the nail on the head, and then they just go, oh, well, that one fits the story, so we'll keep that one in the edit.
We've seen other investigations where they've caught more than at that particular place. I think the name is probably more well known than any footage or anything they've actually caught. I think things are pointing towards this preacher, especially if he then went on to have a history of being in an asylum, was it, or a mental institution later on in his life. Right. I think they know who did it. It's just a shame that if people are going in and investigating and they're picking up screams and things, that's horrific. But then they're picking up screams, but it was reported that at the crime scene there was only one child that tried to hide from the person. No one else seemed to have moved from being in their beds.
They might have just been scared and hid under their bed covers. They're really tiny children.
Yeah, one was 5, weren't they?
Yeah, so you don't know. They might have been paralysed by fear.
Yeah, it's tragic. It really is tragic. Whether or not I think it's haunted, I don't know. I think the things I've seen, the shows I've seen, the different investigations we've seen at that property, I haven't seen much to really sway me to the opinion that it is haunted. But we haven't seen everything to do with that particular location. If any of our listeners have visited the place, or if they know someone who's been there and they've experienced something, they can always drop us an email, spirithounds@yahoo.com. Let us know your experiences if you have been to this property.
My personal theory is it's the preacher, because there was one other person who said to be able to swing an axe in such small rooms would actually suggest he was of small stature. So even though the police kind of exonerated him for that reason, saying he was too wimpy to be able to do that kind of murder, he was the right height to be able to lift the axe above his head and actually clear the ceilings and stuff.
Yeah, I think it is a very tragic story, but it does have a huge reputation in America, doesn't it? And it's not going to stop being a big place to visit anytime soon.
This is why I wanted to cover it quite early on, because a lot of the ghost investigators have done it. There's a lot about it. I mean, if you go on YouTube and look it up, you will find documentaries about the actual killings. You will find loads of ghost investigations by various shows. Again, when you watch it, be sceptical, because a lot of people have gone there and not had experiences. So why does it happen for some and not others?
Exactly. And it's such a sad story, but a very compelling story. And it's understandable why so much has been written about it and why it's been covered. Like you say, various paranormal investigations, but also lots of documentaries and things about it.
It is odd, though, that this is the one, out of all those 90 people that he might have killed, this same individual, this is the one that seems to have the main focus on it. There's all them other victims out there, but this one, because it's 8 in one night, is the sort of epicentre point where people focus, I think.
That's a lot, isn't it? And it would make sense if it is haunted there, because there's a lot of tragedy occurring in one violent outburst in one particular night. So if there is any residual activity going on, it's going to be somewhere like there.
I do know on one of the shows we did watch, there was a scream supposedly caught on the recorder, wasn't there?
That did send a shiver down my spine.
It was quite a horrible, harrowing scream. Seeing as the ghost story we started with was quite a harrowing tale of murder, I thought I'd go for something a little bit lighter to finish things off. So here goes. Numerous ghosts reportedly roam Athelhampton House, a large estate in Dorset near Dorchester, England. But perhaps the most famous of all spectral entities is the ghost of Martyn, a pet ape, possibly a chimpanzee, that belonged to William Martyn and his family, who built Athelhampton in 1485. Legend has it Martyn suffered a gnarly fate when he was accidentally sealed in a room and died of starvation. Guests of the estate claim they hear Martyn scratching at the walls, eager to escape his unintentional tomb. Others, however, claim that Martyn is an overly happy ghost who expresses his happiness in a rather crude manner. Several visitors claim they hear Martyn laughing or pleasuring himself. Some say his randy side of the ape comes from his infatuation with one of William Martyn's daughters, and that she might have been responsible for his early demise, given they claim she locked herself in her room to end her own life following a heartbreak, not knowing Martyn had also followed her inside. What do you think of that story then?
Also kind of tragic,
well,
but
they're all going to
funny
be deaf,
in a way that it's a monkey.
Yeah, or an ape.
An ape. Sorry, an ape.
Get it right, not a monkey.
Sorry, Martyn. Yeah, that's a strange one. Not heard about ghosts of apes before.
No, a promiscuous chimp.
So he followed her into the room where she was going to take her own life, and he ended up being sealed in there with her.
It seems to be the case.
Oh, that's so sad. But now he's seen pleasuring himself to people.
And laughing.
And laughing while he's doing it.
Again, I just thought it was a nicer image. Well, kind of a nicer image. No, I'm going to rephrase that. A more light image than the children being massacred.
Yeah, we'll go with lighter image than that. Okay, well, moving on to something maybe a little bit lighter. I wanted to use this section to talk about Nicky's book. Nicky wrote a book back in 2015. He's actually written 2 books, but today we're going to talk about the first book. It's called The Showman And The Shade. It's book 1 of the Deadly Shade series, but we'll just talk about the first book today. As I say, it's called The Showman And The Shade. It's available on Amazon. A little bit about the book before we start some Q&A with Nicky is Jack Reitman was desperate for the success that had eluded him his entire life. This was until he stumbled upon an ancient book granting him power over the dead. Using dark magic, he binds an unwitting soul to his will. His goal? To use the enslaved spirit to act as an intermediary in talking to the deceased, and to become a world-renowned spiritualist medium and filthy rich to boot. What Jack doesn't count on is the unwillingness of his newfound assistant. So, Nicky, Showman in the Shade, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, I actually wrote it when we were in our flat that we mentioned during the first episode, which we both kind of agreed there was something there. There was some kind of weird activity while we lived there. So there was partly that. The other part was during the time of writing, I was really ill. I had, undiagnosed at the time, psoriatic arthritis, which was across my whole body basically. So I ended up kind of bedbound for large periods. And I did it kind of to keep myself sane, I suppose.
So your book, it's about someone who is a fake medium, but he finds this book, he wants to get a real life spirit to be bound to him so he can use it as his spirit guide and make money, become rich from it, but through nefarious means. Do you believe in mediums?
Sadly, no. I'd like to believe in something like this, like psychics, but there was a $1 million reward actually offered at one point. I believe it was from 1964 to 2015, where they said anyone who could come up with psychic phenomenon in a controlled condition in the US would get this reward, and no one came forward to claim it in the end. Historically, though, there was one psychic called Mother Shipton, and we actually visited her cave in Knaresborough near York. And she predicted many things, apparently, including the end of the Catholic Church under Henry VIII, the fall of Cardinal Wolsey, the death of Edward VI, the bloody events of Mary's reign, and that Elizabeth would take to the throne. She also foretold about the Spanish Armada turning up, and according to one source, she even predicted the Great Fire of London. We have seen people like Derren Brown, for example, where he did his show where he pretended to be a medium.
Yeah.
And he about cold reading and how it's done. And seeing how easily he could do that, it sadly makes me have my doubts about mediums in general.
Yeah, Derren Brown. He's brilliant. Love Derren Brown. Absolutely recommend him to everybody. So mediums, yeah, I'm with you. I'm not 100% convinced that they do exist. We've seen some convincing ones on, again, some of the paranormal investigation shows. They'll take in a supposed medium to walk around a place and see if they can pick up on anything, tell them a bit about the history of the property. So my next question was, if anyone out there wanted to make your book into a film or a TV show, do you have any actors in mind for the characters?
I think very much for Jack, I do. I was thinking the guy who played Saul Goodman.
Bob Odenkirk.
That's the guy. I think he would be a brilliant.
Definitely, yeah.
As for who plays Frank, the guy who's died, not really. I can't think of any English actor that jumps to my mind.
Maybe yourself?
No thanks.
You'd know him very well. You'd know his motivations and things like that as a character.
I think it's worth saying that the book is not what a lot of people expect it to be. People think it's going to be super scary. It's not super scary. And that's mainly because it's written from the point of view of the ghost. So you are in the Frank Long situation where he has been trapped by this person, being forced to do things for him.
There was some dark humour in there as well.
I was in quite a dark place at the time of writing it, I suppose. So.
Yeah, but there are some funny bits, dark funny bits, but it is a good book. I know I'm biased, but it is a good book. So yeah, that's called The Showman and the Shade. It's available on Amazon. You can download it for your Kindle, or it is available on paperback as well. We'll maybe talk about the next book in future episodes.
I would add, even though it's one of a series, it is a standalone book. You can read that book and not read another book.
Yeah.
You can just read that one. It does have an ending.
Yeah, it does. It's not a big cliffhanger at the end of it.
No, I don't like it when you have a series of books and you go one directly into the other. I do think you're better off having a complete story in a book.
Right, so the next section of today's episode is the dog training section. Today I thought we would talk about barking. Barking is one of the top reasons that I'm called out for clients as one of the biggest training issues that people have with their dogs. Nicky, do you know why dogs bark?
It's an effort to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that I did read somewhere that dogs have developed the ability to bark just to communicate with us. The wolves, etc., don't bark, they howl.
Right.
So they'll do it for different reasons. Protecting the property, probably the most common one.
Mm-hmm.
To alert their owner, for attention, because they're sick or need something or need to go out.
Yeah, you're right. The top reasons that you say is attention, excitement, fear, boredom, frustration, to tell someone to stay away or leave, something like that. So you're right, they do bark to communicate with us, much like wagging their tail.
And it's right, isn't it? With the tail wagging, if you see the dog wagging its tail and it's more sort of middle to left, it's an anxious wag.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of people think, oh, my dog's still excited to meet this person because he's wagging his tail. But it's actually a kind of like, I'm not happy about this situation.
Yeah, it can be a subtle difference, but there are differences. And practices such as tail docking, it's very inhumane because you've taken away the dog's ability to communicate. There are practices, quite extreme practices, of people having their dogs debarked or devocalised or devoiced. It's inhumane. Deprives the dog of being able to effectively communicate or express itself. It doesn't even work properly. The dog will still make a raspy noise while it's trying to bark, but effectively they're just cutting the vocal cords. Thankfully, this practice is illegal in the UK. Same with tail docking, ear cropping and declawing, apart from on medical grounds. But we do need our dogs to learn to stop when we say thank you, that's enough. Because although barking is a natural way for them to communicate with us, it can be a big problem, especially if it's continuous and especially if the neighbours start complaining when their dog's barking day and night.
And we have a miniature dachshund. They're quite prone to barking. She's pretty good though.
She's getting better.
Yeah.
Fortunately, dachshunds are prone to barking at everything and anything. So on top of the list of reasons we've given for regular dogs to bark, with dachshunds they tend to go, oh, a leaf, bark. Oh, someone walked past, bark. Oh, it's windy, bark, bark. So yeah, it can be quite extreme sometimes with dachshunds. So again, that's one of the most...
Prevalent? I can't say it.
Again, that's one of the most prevalent breeds that we get called out for with any training areas. So yeah, I thought we'd talk about barking today. In the first instance, if your dog is barking, check the obvious reasons why your dog could be barking. Do they need to go to the toilet? Is their water bowl empty? Is it past their dinner time? Are there any signs of illness? Maybe they've lost their favourite toy, it's gone under the sofa and they're trying to get your attention to get it back for them. Is the temperature too hot or too cold? So first of all, rule out any of those things, and then whatever you've got left, you can tell then it's a behavioural thing that needs addressing.
It's almost like a baby crying. There's a reason for it.
Generally there is a reason. Sometimes it's a learnt behaviour though. Again, if the dog realises he gets attention if he barks at you, even if it's negative attention, you're telling him to be quiet, be quiet, be quiet, he's going to keep doing it because he still gets the attention, good or bad. Another thing you can do is make sure your dog has had plenty of breed-appropriate exercise. A well-exercised dog is a calm, contented and well-behaved dog. When we're doing training to stop dogs barking all the time, it's very important to not reward or reinforce the barking behaviour. So the techniques that we're going to be talking about today, practice them as many times as you can in between real life scenarios where the dog is going to bark at something such as the doorbell going off or barking at people when he's walking down the street. If you can train as many times as possible in a proper structured training time, then it will make things a lot easier when you're in those real life situations.
We see quite a lot where the dog is misbehaving, either through fear or barking, and the person will be patting their dog or telling their dog, oh, it's good boy, don't worry, and it's reinforcing the barking.
Exactly. It's a bit like we were talking last time with the fear of fireworks. The dog's really scared, it starts off being quite anxious, people are hugging it, stroking it, going, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. That's reinforcing it. So that behaviour then becomes ingrained in the dog and it becomes a habit. So the dog then thinks, this is what I need to do. I need to bark, 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 because I'm being told, good boy, giving strokes, and it just unfortunately inadvertently reinforces that behaviour.
It's conditioning, isn't it? Like with Pavlov's spell.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we need to recondition them or counter-condition them to behave in a separate, more appropriate way. So the first thing to do when the dog starts barking, turn your back, fold your arms. Don't look at the dog or speak to the dog. What we want to do is wait for a break in the barking. About 5 to 10 seconds of silence is optimal. So turn your back, dogs bark, bark, bark. Wait until you get 5 seconds, clear seconds of silence. Turn back to them and say calmly, good, quiet. Give a high value treat to We tend to use high value treats when we're first teaching a command to a dog because it is more of a motivator. If you've got something really nice like chicken or hot dog sausage, that dog's going to learn a lot quicker that this behaviour is appropriate, this is what's expected of me.
Or you could save up their dinner allowance, so it's actually their meal you're rewarding them with if you have to.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want to give too many high value rich treats to a dog and have problems with weight issues. It's just initially when we first start, something high value. Even do the training before their meal times so they're more motivated to successfully carry out the commands that you're teaching, and then you can give them either their own food, as long as it's something high value enough that the dog's going to want that reward for carrying out that behaviour. Now there are different scenarios where your dog might be barking. Some bark primarily when they're in the garden, some bark at the front door, some bark when they're on a walk and see other dogs or people walking towards them. First of all, if your dog barks when they're in the garden, use a long lead. You can get one of those really long training leads, attach it to the dog when they're out in the garden. As soon as they start barking when they're out there, say nope. You don't have to shout or anything, just say nope. Grab the lead, bring them back indoors immediately for 10 seconds until they're quiet again. As soon as they're quiet and they've calmed down, drop the lead, let them back outside again. Repeat that as many times as necessary, but as soon as the dog starts barking, just say no, grab the lead, pull them back inside. When the dog is quiet and you let them back out, remember to praise them with good quiet. Then you're reinforcing that quiet label, that quiet command, so they understand the difference between quiet and speak. Because sometimes when dogs are barking, the owners are going quiet, 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 and the dog thinks, yeah, quiet, 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 and everyone's joining in and it's all very exciting. Completely turn the tables, talk to them quietly, and when they are quiet, then say good quiet, and they learn that that's the appropriate behaviour.
People will actually shout at their dog when their dog's barking, and the dog is just thinking you're joining in with me. He doesn't realise it's being shouted at.
No, exactly. It's all attention, it's all very exciting. You've escalated the situation then to everyone else is joining in, and again, it reinforces that barking behaviour. So with the bringing the dog in on that lead, you're just saying no, leading him back in, letting him back out again after about 10 seconds, and then you're praising him with good quiet. This way we're not hurting the dog, we're not shouting the dog, but we are showing him that there are immediate consequences and there's nothing beneficial to continue with that behaviour. The dog's not getting anything good from barking, he's just being taken away from that situation and brought inside. It can be helpful if your dog does bark when he goes outside into the garden to lead the dog outside. Put your dog on the lead, walk him outside. If you walk all around the perimeter of your garden, you between the dog and the fence, walk around, and then the dog will know that there's nothing to be afraid of, there's nothing to bark at, it's all fine. If there's a particular area of the garden that your dog barks at all the time, try and body block the dog. So if the dog is going at a particular corner, step in between the dog, walk towards the dog, guiding him backwards, just saying nope, and guide him away from that area. In another scenario, if your dog barks at the front door or visitors coming in, much like as before, put them on an indoor lead, something that you can easily grab, and straight away lead them away to another room for 10 seconds. Then drop the lead again, let them go back out to the scenario. If they start barking again, grab the lead, say nope, and walk them away into another room. Don't get drawn into any large gestures or loud protestations. Another thing you can do if your dog barks at the front door, make sure you claim that space back around the front door. The dog should not be the gatekeeper to the front door. Again, body block your dog away from the door, standing between them and the door, and just saying back, 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 while you're walking towards the dog away from the door. So you're claiming that space back around the front door. Also, if the dog barks at visitors that come into the house, let the visitors know to ignore the dog when they're coming into the property. Tell your visitors not to stare at the dog, don't tower over the dog. That can be interpreted as threatening or intimidating body language.
Also, something you can try is pretending to yawn, because when you're doing that, the dog thinks you're ready to go to sleep, you're not actually interested in them, you're not a threat.
Exactly. Another training technique that we like to try and incorporate when teaching dogs to stop barking and jumping at the front door when the doorbell goes is using sit and stay to keep your dog in a designated spot in the house. So what we would do is get them to sit stay, the doorbell goes off, the dog has to stay in that position while the person goes to the door, lets the visitor in, everyone comes back in and the dog stays in that position until they're released. Normally with the visitor offering a toy or a treat when they come in, because then it's really high motivator again for the dog to sit and wait for that person to give them that really high value treat.
It's got to be calmly done as well. You can't be like, hey, here's a toy, because you're ramping them back up again. It has to be calm praise, good boy, just drop the toy near them and continue on your way. And also when we're choosing the spot that the dog would be sitting on, we will use something to designate that spot, be it a mat or their bed or something, so they've got that feel under their feet that that's the spot they're meant to be on.
Yeah, we would say to somebody, do you want to use a mat or do you want to use their own bed? Then we label that, we get the dog to go to their bed, go to your spot, go to your mat, and the dog then learns that that's the spot that they need to go to and stay at until they're released.
It's worth noting we only use the one label though, and everyone has to use the same label.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Consistency is key. Anybody who is involved in a dog's training ideally should be present during training, or the main primary caregiver needs to let the other people in the household know exactly what the techniques are, how to implement them, and to keep everything consistent. We don't want to confuse the dog or set the dog up for failure.
And we've had it where a dog has been very bad, like trying to bolt for the door, and within a session of 20 minutes, 30 minutes, you can get that dog to sit on that spot, go to that door when the bell's gone off, speak to someone, shut the door and come back, and the dog will be on the spot. So it is highly doable.
Yeah, dogs by their nature, they do want to please us. They don't try and go out of their way to anger us or frustrate us. It's just a learnt behaviour. The barking and the jumping and lunging at things, it's just something that they've learned and unfortunately has been reinforced by the people around them, but it can be turned around quite quickly. And with the sound of the bell, that can take a little while on its own. But as in the last session when we were talking about fireworks and desensitising to the sound, you can do exactly that same technique with getting your dog used to the sound of your doorbell. If you've got a Ring doorbell, you can find numerous videos on YouTube with that sound, so you can play it through your TV at increasing levels of volume to get the dog used to that sound, accustomed to the sound. If you can't find something that sounds like your doorbell, just record the sound of your doorbell and then play it back to your dog through your phone or other device, gradually increasing the sound using the same techniques we spoke about last time.
Or if there's more than one person, one of you can actually be out there to be the trigger person. And that's good because then you can add a mix of when the dog's getting to that point, doorbell, letterbox, things like that. When you get a delivery and they bang the door, bang the letterbox, ring the bell, you want your dog to be staying on that spot still, knowing you've got it.
Exactly. It is handy if you've got a second person there to carry out the role play of being an actual visitor at the door, because you can get to a certain point on your own where you're pretending the doorbell's going, you're going to the door, opening it, but it is handy having that second voice outside going, "Oh, hello, how are you? May I come in?" Another scenario where your dog might bark a lot is if you're out on a walk and the dog barks at other people or other dogs. The best thing to do in that scenario is turn the other way, lead the dog away in the opposite direction. Keep walking until the dog stops trying to turn its head back around or turn back around to look in the direction of the other dog. As soon as the dog starts walking along nicely next to you again, then turn back around and start walking towards the trigger dog or the trigger person again. If the dog starts trying to pull or lunge again, turn back, walk away again. Keep repeating it until the dog gets the idea. In the animal world, dogs wouldn't normally walk towards each other head on. That can be seen as quite confrontational. So what would normally happen when dogs approach each other off lead is approach in a semicircle towards each other, normally heading towards the butt area, have their sniff, and then turn, maybe sniff each other's faces, and then walk off because they're happy with that. So when we do encounter people walking towards us when we're out on a walk, that's quite a forced scenario where you're forcing the dog to walk towards another dog, and that can be quite confrontational. So that normally explains why a dog would bark when it's walking head on towards another dog coming in another direction. You can walk in a zigzag way. If you see another dog coming towards you, you can maybe cross the road, walk past them in a more parallel way, walk back so they're not head on.
Another thing I notice that whenever I go out walking anywhere is the amount of houses you walk past and there's a dog at the window, usually on the back of a sofa or on the window ledge itself, barking its head off at you as you go by. And we know that when a dog's doing that, every time you walk past or someone passes by, that dog is barking and thinking, I scared that person off. They didn't come in, barked loads, they went away. And that rewards the barking. So it's really important to actually stop your dog doing that and having access to a window where they can bark at people passing all day, every day. Because if they're doing that, it's going to escalate. And you might get to the point where a stranger comes into your house and your dog's thinking, well, didn't scare this one away. And it will have to up the ante and it will go for a bite potentially.
Yeah, exactly. It's a tricky one because a lot of owners are unaware of their dogs barking at people because they're not there. They might be at work, and if the dog's just left and it's looking out the window, like you say, people are approaching the house, he thinks he's guarding his territory, barking at them. The person walks past, as they're going to do anyway. The dog's thinking he's done a good job, got rid of that one, on to the next. So it is difficult. A dog will not stop barking at people walking past the house purely by thinking, he'll get used to it. He'll get used to people walking past, because it's very self-rewarding for a dog. As we've just explained, the dog thinks he's done a good job, so he's just self-reinforced that behaviour. So in that scenario, if your dog is barking at people walking past the window, again, we would use an indoor lead. Soon as the dog starts barking at someone walking past, you can have a fake person walk past, stage it while you're doing training sessions. As soon as the dog starts barking, you would grab that indoor lead, just say nope, lead them away to another room, 10 seconds, let them out again, have that person walk past again, and repeat until the dog learns, I'd get taken away from this situation if I start barking.
And equally, when you're not there, it's best to move them to a room where they haven't got access to that view, which is going to be triggering them all the time.
Exactly. Yeah, you need to remove that completely when you're not in the property. Close the curtains, close the door so they don't have access to that, because that's just going to undo all the training that you've already done. And try and do these training sessions as often as you can. You can't do it once a week and then expect the dog to know it. You know when a dog's getting the idea of it because you can go through the training scenario and the dog will become less and less reactive. That doesn't mean he's trained. You do need to keep reinforcing that, retraining, and do it as many times as you can. Again, so when the real life scenarios happen, your dog knows what to do. Okay, so that's the end of the training segment for this episode and the end of the show. Was there anything else you wanted to add today, Nicky?
Only that we'll share links and things in the description somewhere.
Yeah, we'll put links to everything that needs links added to it in all the description boxes where possible. If you have any submissions, anything you want to send to us, any ghostly stories, anything you've experienced, any strange things that your dog has done, any training techniques or tips that you would like, you can email us at spirithounds@yahoo.com. You can follow us on our YouTube channel, which is at Spirit Hounds. You can follow us on our Facebook page, which is called Spirit Hounds Podcast. If you wanted to book any training with us, you can find us at www.storepaws.co.uk. If you wanted to get hold of a copy of Nicky's book, The Showman And The Shade, that is available on Amazon. And that's it for this episode. Thank you for listening, and we'll speak to you next time.